Good evening. My name is Fiona Coffey. I'm the Associate Director for Programming and Performing Arts at Wesleyan Center for the Arts, joined by my colleague, Ronnie Arbo, Campus and Community Engagement Manager.
Before we begin tonight's program, we want to acknowledge that at Wesleyan Center for the Arts, we believe that one of the roles of the arts is to make the invisibilized visible. We also believe that it is not the responsibility of those who have been made invisible to remind us that they are still here. Therefore, as committed allies, we wish to acknowledge the grounds on which we are present tonight. Wesleyan is located on the traditional lands of the Wangang. We honor their land, water, and ancestors, past, present, and future, and we recognize their continued existence and contributions to our society. We also recognize and acknowledge those who did not come to this land by choice. All who come are welcome in this space today.
It is our pleasure to welcome you this evening to After Party in the Bardo with Laurie Anderson. Wesleyan has had an extraordinary year with writer, director, visual artist, and vocalist Laurie Anderson. Laurie first came to campus last fall for a 3-day visit and to perform The Art of Falling to a sold-out crowd at Kroll Concert Hall. During her year-long residency at Wesleyan, Laurie visited classes, critiqued student compositions, had dinner with our Center for the Humanities Fellows, toured the Wesleyan Gamelan, and much more. For the past 6 months, Laurie has worked on creating a new radio series called Party in the Bardo, which aired every other week on WESU 88.1 Middletown, and which debuted on Laurie's 73rd birthday, June 5th. These 11 episodes encompass wide-ranging radio conversations with friends and colleagues who are musicians, artists, writers, and poets, some of whom are going to join the party tonight. We are so grateful to Laurie for her time, creativity, and generosity over the past year with us, and to all the artists and technicians who worked with her to make this residency possible. There will be a Q&A portion at the end of this conversation, so please feel free to put questions into the chat, and Laurie and her guests will answer them at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn the party over to my dear colleague, Ronnie.
Thanks, Fiona. Welcome, everyone, to the After Party in the Bardo. It is wonderful to have you here with us. It was a joy working with Laurie on this project, so I'd like to welcome Laurie Anderson and Ben Michael, who's General Manager of WESU 88.1 FM Middletown. Hi, Ben. Hi, Laurie, to talk about it, how it all came together. And first, just to say, 2020 has been an extraordinary year in the world, and with you at Wesleyan, Laurie, so much happened since you were here on campus last November. We've grappled with a pandemic, an intense and contested election, protests against police killings and systemic racism, and continuing climate change disasters. And in the middle of all of this turmoil and divisiveness that gripped the US in 2020, in the middle of the tweets and the lies, social media silos, and the sound bites, Laurie turned to Party in the Bardo, to creating long conversations with really dear friends, long conversations that take their time. So Laurie, I'm hoping that you can tell us kind of the origin story of the Party in the Bardo, when you thought of it, what drew you to it at this time. Tell us where it came from for you.
Well, thanks for having this after party event.
Yeah.
It is a challenge to get that party going in our little boxes, but you know, and part of that was part of why I wanted to do this was the isolation that I felt, and but really it went back much earlier to a fantasy that I've always had, well, for many, many years, to live in San Francisco and have a radio show that would be at 4 a.m. and it would be before drive time, so people would be in this kind of no man's land of drifting between dreams and thoughts. And so I thought, what a great time to do music and have conversations that could really just drift. That was really important to me. That it was like, now, did we record at 4 a.m.? No, we didn't record at 4 a.m. Although I was often up almost until 4 a.m. Editing and getting these things to Ben. I'm like, Ben, I have it. It's going to be there in an hour. Oh, technical problem. So it was a really wonderful process for me to just try to put these things together. Ben, I think we always met the deadline, right? Didn't we? Oops, you're muted right there.
Unmute yourself, Ben.
You just got, yeah.
There you go.
Sorry, Radio Pro here. But yeah, I think that we did pretty good. I mean, we started off very close to that deadline, but as the series progressed, we gave ourselves a little bit more room, which was pretty great to see come to fruition ultimately. I know it was a big challenge putting all the production in your lap, basically, and that while you are a maverick and a genius artist, this was some new territory for you. From my perspective, I think you ran with it and you did wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a geek, and so I have my little setup here. I'm in my little studio on Eastern Long Island, and it works just fine. You know, you can make a lot of things in a laptop these days. So the process was really pretty simple. One is having an engineer on the other line while we were recording, and then going through a few different layers and putting it together. But the fun part for me was really being able to talk to friends for a couple hours. I highly recommend this. If just ask your friend to play the music that they like for 2 hours for you, and you will have so much more insight into who they are, you know. And I didn't realize that it was going to be this, but it almost felt like making portraits of my friends, because they were showing so many things that they were interested in, and I didn't think of that at all until I got more into it, and I realized that it really was that they were really driving this. And I learned a lot about music that I would not necessarily have heard. So that was a wild thing. And then, Ben, you had to do a lot of stuff with levels and things, because these things would come in with, you know, they weren't in a mastered form, you know.
It was a team effort.
That's part of my job here at the radio station, generally managing to keep things in line and keep it's rolling 24/7. And it was a real pleasure to work with you on this one.
So you are 24/7 at the station, just doing stuff.
These days I've been on call 24/7 for about 15 years now, basically, and since lockdown, we've had no live people in the studio, so all of our programming has been pre-recorded, and without a live person in the studio, we need somebody who's actually paying attention to respond in case something goes down the wrong way. So while You may not have been there at 4 a.m. I definitely was, and I have a pretty intimate experience with the show from that perspective. I mean, just trying to make sure that it was there. I mean, this is the service we provide and promise to folks. So, what a surreal experience for me to be listening to these episodes at 4 a.m. on my couch with the sun coming up and in a really quiet household. It really was quite something. And I know, you know, the 4 a.m. crowd was not huge online as far as I could tell, but there were people who were tuning in specifically for this, I think, to get that full 2-hour experience. And, you know, we heard from a couple of them. If you don't mind, I'll read you like one of my favorite quotes. The Party in the Bardo series is an unbelievable gift, a unique time capsule for these times. The opportunity to be a fly on the wall for this conversation is one that shouldn't be taken for granted. Thank you. XO. I'm a fan.
Nice. Yeah, we did try to make it a bit of a record of not that we're not in the middle of it still, of the last of the COVID era, really, and what it feels like to be living through this, as well as every single show we talked about politics and it lived up to its name of, you know, uncertainty, because the Bardo, as we would say in every show, is this 49-day period of between life and death, or between life and life, you know. And some interpretations of the Bardo are that we're in the Bardo right now. So the bottom line is that the Bardo is a time of extreme uncertainty, and so the theme of every single show was, whoa, what do you think is going to happen? Do you have any idea where this is going? And so the lack of a storyline threw us into the present in a way that I really so much enjoyed, and that's a great state of mind to listen to music in. You just don't know what's coming next, and you just kind of drift. So it was a really nice to be able to create a vibe like that. It was really fun.
I love that you say that, Laurie, and I think it just makes me think about what a good fit this was for WESU, because WESU is definitely one of these radio stations where you really don't know, unless you read the schedule ahead of time, what you're going to get next. I mean, just to say for a second, I think this is WESU's 80th birthday this year. And one of the fun things that happened when we started talking about this radio show and we looped Ben in and we said, hey, does this feel like a good fit to you? Ben, you brought up the fact that you had a show years and years and years ago at ESU called, as I recall,
Difficult Listening Hour, which is a direct nod to Laurie and one of her great pieces over the years. And yeah, I would just close my portion of this by saying that as a radio guy who got started 20 years ago at a community and college radio station with a program from 3 till 5 a.m. that was called it was called Difficult Listening Hour, in a direct nod to Laurie. It was really my pleasure and my dream come true to help you make your dream come true of having a radio show in the middle of the night. And I think everybody comes out a winner from this. And so thanks for your time and just helping WESU be in the moment and provide something for our listeners to help them cope and manage and deal with and be inspired by some really challenging times.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ben. It's really, really fun.
Should we go take a look at all the incredible guests that you had on this program over the last 5 months? Laurie, let's do that, and then we'll bring in some very special guests who are with us tonight.
Sure. Okay.
We have a slideshow of this extraordinary parade of human beings and artists. So we'll just run through it. Composer and sound artist Bruce Odland. Musician and artist Ardo Lindsay. Artist Marina Abramovic. Singer and visual artist Ananye. Pianist, composer, and artist Jason Moran. multi-instrumentalist Kevin Hearn, bassist and composer Christian McBride. And the next three I'm going to read here and show photos of are the guests that are with us tonight to have a little party in the Bardo after party with Laurie. So I'm just going to give a quick teaser for each of their episodes. First is Don Shuey, writer, therapist, and pleasure activist. Don and Laurie did a deep dive into song lyrics and singers. They were comparing different versions of several songs, including Famous Blue Raincoat, versions by Judy Collins and Leonard Cohen, and Wrap Your Troubles in Dreams by Velvet Underground, Bing Crosby, and Nico. And Don read from Rumi's The Guest House and also played songs from Arvo Pärt, Kate and Anna McGarrigle, and Aretha Franklin as well. And then today we also have with us Irish poet, professor of poetry, editor, critic, playwright, lyricist, and translator Paul Muldoon, who started his episode off by playing a wax cylinder recording of Walt Whitman reading his poem America. And then from there, their conversation ranged through Paul's past life as a BBC radio producer. They talked about the allure of hoaxes, the life of a sound wave, and compared the vocal performances of William Butler Yeats and Lou Reed. Laurie played Allen Ginsberg's Howl, and Paul read his poem Drive By at the Drive-In and played music from Van Morrison and Bob Dylan and many others. And last but not least, writer and contributing editor at Rolling Stone, also with us tonight, Jonathan Cott, created two beautiful bookends for Party in the Bardo. For the first episode, he and Laurie talked about time and about hesitation. They had us listening to the spaces between musical notes. They talked about childhood memories and ideas of perfection and beauty and symmetry. And for a final episode on love, which is still up on the WESU archives, I encourage everyone to go hear it, Jonathan brought poems and songs from Laurie herself and from the Geechee Gula Ring Shouters, from the Gita Govinda, and from many more. So it's impossible, of course, to boil these beautiful 2-hour conversations down to 10 seconds, and you can read more about all these artists. All of their bios are in the Party in the Bardo archives, which we'll put that link into the chat. And as we bring our honored guests onto screen, just a reminder to think about any questions you have for Laurie or her guests tonight, to put them in the chat, and we'll gather them up and talk about them at the end. So again, welcome to Laurie, Jonathan Cott, Paul Muldoon, and Don Shuey.
Wow, we're all together in the same group. That's wild, because with each of our conversations, it was like, well, what was that like for you to just drift along? What did you make of that, Paul? Like, are you usually up at that time of day and drifting yourself, or is that a kind of anomaly for you?
You know, I actually do get up quite early. I usually get up at about 5 o'clock. And winter and summer, if I can, that's my natural tendency. It's such a wonderful hour of the day, and I think actually it's a time of day in which one is naturally, I think, in a kind of trance-like state, and it's that very state, I think, that so many art forms are involved with. Obviously music, but I think also the written and certainly the spoken word. The trance, Proust writes about this somewhere. He talks about how one can spend an afternoon engrossed by a book and, you know, suddenly come to and wonder, where has that time gone? Mm-hmm. And the same is true, of course, when one is, if one's terribly lucky, when one is engaged in writing itself. There's a sense that one is absent in some strange way. One is a medium for something beyond oneself. That, for me, is the ideal. And so in that sense, a time of day when one's not quite together in a conventional sense.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure in my own case if I'm ever together in a conventional sense, but what I welcome very much is the sense that I'm at the mercy of something beyond myself.
Yeah. Are you right? Is that what you're doing in the morning, or is writing at 5 or reading?
No, I try to write. I mean, and it may not, usually what I try to write is poetry, a rather grand term. One word following in another, and it may be a poem, it may be an essay, it may be an email. Generally, I try to do something, and I encourage my students to do this also, to try to write when one is at one's best. Of course,
That's interesting.
yes, because I think it's a physical as well as an intellectually demanding business. I think one needs all one's wits about one and all one's strength about one. Now, I happen to be in that happens for me at around 5 a.m. For my students, it happens around midnight or 1 a.m. and it's kind of hilarious to see their poems coming in for the weekly class and make it 3 a.m.
Oh, yeah.
That's when they're at their best, the young folk.
Yeah, yeah. We often sort of talked about what was going on in the world at that moment. How did that affect did that affect your choices of music? Don, were you thinking of that like as some way to react to what was going on, or because I was I felt that, but I just didn't know if that was a more intuitive thing than chosen thing.
Well, I felt like you, Laurie, were thinking very much about what's going on in the world as you were sorting music selections and so forth. I'm not sure my music selections had so much reflection of what's going on in the world. Not as much as yours.
As a therapist, though, it seems to me that you were trying to use it that way a little bit. Was that true, or is that me just reading into it?
I don't know.
I'm curious about, I mean, what it must be like for you to be working with so many people who are, I think it was so interesting you pointed out that the people who were having the hardest time generally began to have an easier time in this era. Is that?
Right. It is true that for some people, it's surprising to learn that there are some people for whom isolation and staying at home is a blessing, not a curse. Yeah. There are lots of people who are extroverts and sociable and are really struggling, craving contact and being out in the world, and other people are totally happy to be home doing their own thing.
Yeah.
And for it not to be labeled as pathological.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I did find that in doing these shows, we were able often to get behind and underneath some of the things that were big issues and see what was going on beneath them. And I'm thinking, particularly as the country got more and more polarized, that it almost seemed, it was almost hard to see what was animating both sides so fiercely. And one of the things I was realizing when we were talking about polarization was that many of the issues were about such much more basic things than I thought, so, and for example, that the polarization was around big ideas like freedom and death, for example. So you have the issue of abortion is that some people see abortion as freedom and some people see it as death. Or the issue of guns, some people see guns as freedom and some see it as death. And so I think it was just being able to see some of these issues through the filter of music and sort of dreamlike state that makes it easier to see a little bit of what was going on and what's still going on in in terms of the politics. I mean, we each show was, it seemed like there was yet another cataclysmic thing, George Floyd, and then it went on and on. Jonathan, what was going on when we did the first show together? Were you thinking in terms of what was going on politically or culturally at that point? Because I think you wanted to focus on this idea of the pause,
Yeah, I think the way I thought of it was that this was a kind of a conceptual show, because we weren't going to be really recording at 4 a.m., but we were going to make it seem as if it were 4 a.m. We were all communicating with each other. And it has that feeling of, when Thoreau said our truest life is when we are in dreams awake. I like that idea of that what you mentioned before about sort of sleeping, waking, that kind of thing, that, not to get too portentous or pretentious about it, but when Keats says in the Ode to the Nightingale, he talks about, was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music, do I wake or sleep?
Mm-hmm.
I thought that's sort of what you were kind of aiming towards or aiming at. And the idea at 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. was really interesting, because I know F. Scott Fitzgerald said that 3 a.m. was the dark night of the soul, and I thought it was great that you started at 4. And so from 4 to 6,
yeah, what is that?
Dark to light, and they say, I experienced it once in the desert, that the darkest hour comes always just before the dawn. And so your program, at least conceptually, if it started at 4, ending at 6, you would arrive at dawn coming into your life. So I thought of your program like that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I don't know if you had that feeling too.
Well, I had not so much a narrative arc of like that as just a kind of, I kept playing one thing a lot, William Basinski's disintegration loops, and those have no development whatsoever. They don't go from 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 or beginning to end there. You're just inside them. And as I use this music, as I said in the show, as driving music, and it is, it's possible out here where I am now to drive at 0.1 miles an hour if you drive late at night. And you put this music on and you drive unbelievably slowly, and you just watch the trees rise above that. It is really, that was what I wanted the show to be. Feel.
I don't know if Don and Paul felt this, but I noticed that when listening to the show, that for instance, we could mention a subject or a name of someone or whatever, and then all of a sudden you would magically transform it into music. You get some kind of an undercurrent you create of they say all art aspires to the condition of music. Well, you seem to somehow, like an alchemist, sort of transform words and subjects and you embody it into musical. I don't know what it is.
Well, there were so many. You all made so many references to different pieces of music, and rather than let them fly by, I just had just little ghosts so that you get just a little bit of the flavor. If you're talking about Verdi, you forget that it's so you hear just a tiny bit of that. Not to say that you didn't all use really descriptive and very, very colorful ways of describing music, but there's nothing like hearing like those gritty, Paul, the things that you brought in with the wax stuff. That I love recordings that are just so gritty and low end. I mean, I was really glad that you thought about saying how the voice can sound, and what recording is about. And so you, as somebody who was doing a lot of radio stuff, was that part of what inspired you to bring in the wax cylinders?
Well, I've always been fascinated by recordings of poets reading their own poems, quote unquote.
Right.
You know, even if they don't necessarily read them terribly well, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they seem to be at the service of some idea of what a poem should sound like rather than the poem itself. Even then, I think there's something to be, some revelation about the poem and indeed about them. And some of my favorite recordings of poets are the very early ones. There's that recording of Whitman that was mentioned earlier on. We're pretty sure it's Whitman, but you know, if it's not, it's okay. And I'd say, and then somebody did a very good impression of Whitman. But we're absolutely certain that we have that recording of Tennyson reading The Charge of the Light Brigade.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it sounds, he sounds like, as we used to say in Ireland, he sounds like a bee in a biscuit tin. It's very high voiced thing. But you can, you know, canon to the right of them, canon to the left of them, and the 600 riding on. But, you know, I have always been fascinated by sound. I started as a radio producer for the BBC when I was 21. And I sort of blundered into it, as I have into almost everything I've done, a couple of things I have done. But, you know, it's a medium which I absolutely adore. And, you know, there's that old truism about radio, about how it's preferable to television or film because the pictures are better.
Yeah.
In the sense that there is a conjuring up. If I say 5,000 Norsemen are coming over the summit of the hill,
yeah,
you can actually see them. And you can see them a lot less for a lot less money than it would take to gather together 5,000 extras, or even to do it digitally. So I love that. I love the power of the word, of course, and in its many guises. Mm-hmm. And so I love the fact that you've focused on a radio show here, and I was so happy to be part of it. And it brought back memories of my own experiences as a radio producer, running around with a little recording device. And that actually is one of the great things about radio. And I'd love to think, we've been taught somehow that to make art requires a lot of money. That somehow we've got that idea. And, modern recording methods and platforms, as I believe they're called, actually, the phone with which one can do so much. I mean, one can get a studio quality image, either sound quality or visual quality, on a phone. And I think that's a great thing. Yeah. And it's a wonderfully democratizing thing. It seems to me anybody who wants to, quote unquote, make art can do it. There is absolutely nothing stopping you. And I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the tech is really available and simple enough for people to do things. But I agree with you about the time frame of radio, is that it doesn't have to fit into a neat 90 minutes or something, or a film, which is a lot of filmmakers, their lives are really fundraising, and so totally. Just decided that he wanted to make a film, but he just couldn't face the years of begging people, and so he did a podcast instead, and it was fantastic. It was just visual, very, very, very visual.
Actually, the great thing about the podcast, if I may say, is that of course, on one hand, one's not anyone if one doesn't have a podcast, I suppose. Yeah. On the other hand, the beauty of it is that actually, unlike radio, most radio is very constricted time-wise, and there are certain slots, half an hour or an hour or 2 hours or whatever it might be. And the wonderful thing about the podcast is that it's as long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
In many cases.
Yeah.
That, I think, is actually a very releasing thing, and actually probably makes for much more interesting art making.
You know, Don, when you chose songs that were the most song-like structures of the things, and I really appreciated that, because I had forgotten the beauty of making a jewel-like song within all of those restrictions. Was that something you were thinking about in terms that structure? Because you were saying that you were kind of fascinated with that brevity.
Well, you and I had one of the most fun things for me about doing this show with you was the conversations we had, mostly via email, but also voice to voice, just tossing ideas back and forth. Yeah. And as I recall, like we went way overboard. We like compiled a list of like 3.5 hours worth of music if we did nothing else but play just those songs. So there actually were all kinds of things we talked about that we didn't actually play on the show. But one of the things one of the themes that I was throwing out to you that interests me is the notion of ecstatic states. And one of the things that puts me in an ecstatic state is close harmony singing. And so a lot of the things that I tossed out to you some of them were about pop singers and pop groups and close harmony singing, which is just a form of music that makes me so happy.
Yeah.
You know, we're all looking for things to make us happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was aware that a lot of the other guests were playing longer, more abstract pieces, and I loved hearing the selections that just blew my mind, that all your guests played, but especially Christian and Jason turned me on, like just amazing pieces, especially jazz pieces that I didn't know, but I loved listening to those stretched out pieces.
For me, I had to do a lot of background also. Once you would say, let's do this, and I was like, I didn't know anything about it, and so so it was really great to go digging around to see what the background was. Jonathan, your structure of the last show that we did, the one up now, Love, was just, it really, really shocked me to see how many things you were drawing it from. What was some of the ideas of that one?
You mean in terms of, with regard to how it was structured or why it was structured that way?
Yeah.
Well, it's a more general thing about it. I don't know if you agree with this. It's a kind of a sort of famous classification of model of the creative process that this guy named Graham Wallace, or Graham Wills or Wallace, I forget, he's early 20th century guy who talked about the 3 or 4 stages of creative process. And he said the first stage is preparation. The second stage is incubation. We just kind of let, you mull over it, you let your unconscious deal with it. You don't really deal with, you don't work on it with your rational brain anymore. You just let it go. And then what he called illumination. And I found that those 3 stages work with regard to my writing, but also in preparing for a program or anything in life. Mm-hmm. Now, it's good often, that it's sometimes a little rigid, because sometimes when you're talking to someone or meeting someone for coffee, you just want to wing it. You don't want to have everything prepared of what you're going to say to someone. It can be pretty bad. But the idea of sort of preparing things and then seeing how they gel without putting too much force on them, and then you get an illumination of what you want to do. But I find that the preparation thing is interesting to me. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about with regard to that 3-stage thing and how it applied to what I did with the program, because everyone has a different way of preparing and illuminating it, having it become an illumination. I don't know how everyone else works, but that particular program, I did preparation for it.
it's, yeah. And I really appreciated the structure. And I have to say that with all of everybody's shows, I didn't really understand them till I was editing them, because they were going by so fast. And there were so many ideas that were just like, and I was also trying to think of like, where should this be going next? So because they're pretty wandery, and we had to kind of like think on our feet about where this is going and how that changed how the last thing we were talking about would change things. So,
but the key to it is, the fact is, you can prepare as much as you want, but then you come in and make some really unusual, wise observation. I'm not trying to flatter you, but or some really illuminating take on what's just been played, or what someone like myself or Paul or Don would say, and you respond in a way that just opens up new areas. So it's not so rigid because of what you do.
Well, I got to think about it as an editor then. So because I would just sit there and try to shape them a little bit. I worked with Brian Eno last year on some recordings that we just recorded for 5 days straight. And we would record for 4 hours in the morning, then we have lunch, and then we would sit in the studio and listen to those 4 hours in real time. And I had always thought that I could play and listen at the same time, and I can't. So when I went back to listen to what we had talked about, I was like, oh, that's what he's saying. I really hadn't, seen the many links that were in your choices that were, just vibrating. So that was really exciting for me to, I think we have to go now to a Q&A thing. We're going to have people, our listeners, call in and get a chance to say something. Unless some of you would like to say something first about the experience in any context.
One thing also, Laurie, that we're talking, when you and I were talking on the radio about therapy clients, and this time being a different time, a better time for some people. And you asked me, briefly, what else has been good about this lockdown period? And at the moment I couldn't think of anything, but later it plagued me. And I thought, one of the things that how it is that you wish you'd said, but I want to say it now, just that one of the things that I think is that happened during this lockdown period is this appreciation for the essential workers. People give lip service around Labor Day to workers, but really especially March, April, May, June, the intense period at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm pretty sure elsewhere, but in New York City, there was intense, detailed appreciation for the people who deliver food, the people who deliver mail, the people who stock stores. And it was very moving to me to see that acknowledgement. It still moves me, because I think people are indeed under-recognized heroes of our daily lives.
Yeah. I think people, I know that I have been essentially so changed by this experience. And most of the people I talk to have a similar experience. How about you? I mean, Don, do you personally feel changed by this?
I still feel like I'm so in the middle of it that
I
can't even measure.
Yeah.
My husband and I make a joke that in the future there will be 2020 studies, and people will be experts on July 17th and April 14th and November 10th, and people will analyze the things that happened that day, because every day has been so rich with bizarre, crazy, insane, significant things.
Yeah, it's really living in history for the first time. I felt that I was, sporadically 9/11 and these moments in these sort of spikes, but this is really an era. Do you feel that, Paul? Do you feel changed by this?
Well, one thing that I do certainly feel, I'm smiling as you're speaking there about the impact that might have. And I drove down today from the Mohawk Valley to New York City, and I actually came to a 4-way stop, and I arrived there around about the same moment as someone else, and so I, flashed the lights and gave them a little wave, and there was someone just behind them, and it was actually a rather dangerous thing to do. So I flashed the lights again and let them go next, right? And my sense is that insofar as I was ever in a rush, and I was never in much of a rush. I'm in absolutely no rush now. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's a wonderful side of, but of course we probably won't, when it's over, quote unquote, we'll probably be running around like ducks and thunder, as my father would have said, immediately. But, slowing down is a great gift.
Yeah. Yeah. I never thought this would happen, and I was pretty sick of that merry-go-round. So this has changed my life and so completely. What about you, Jonathan?
I was just thinking that, how people say in situations like this, well, if you're not, not out of a job, or, if you're just economically destroyed, there's nothing else to say. It's horrendous. But if you can sit at home, let's say, and you can indulge yourself in thinking, okay, I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to listen to some music. I found it, ironically, that it was really hard for me to focus because of everything that was going on. It was the perfect time to focus and to pay attention to something, but I was completely distracted. I don't know if anyone else had that kind of feeling, that it was reading. You have all this time to meditate and read and listen to stuff and whatever. And I just found it really difficult. I guess it's counterintuitive, but I just really found it difficult to, as I said, to pay attention to things.
Yeah. And of course, for an awful lot of people, it's not relaxing at all to lose your job and have no food.
Yeah,
it is not about slow, it's about panicking.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, I think everyone, I feel a kind of tenderness between people who are experiencing the same kind of calamitous situation, and a feeling of goodwill. I mean, I know that's strange to say after such a contentious election, but I feel that happening as well. We have to move on to the Q&A section. So I think Ronnie and Ben are going to be back. Here they are. Hello.
Hey, we're back.
Hey.
Oh, it's so great to hear. So great to hear your conversation. Some of it's making me think about how I think this community that you created in the Bardo is parallel to the instincts that a lot of people had in the pandemic of reconnecting with old friends. When I think the rug gets pulled out and things feel uncertain, we check to see who's there that we trust and we can talk to and remember our important relationships. So I love the parallel that this radio show makes me feel. And before we move to questions, Laurie, I just want to make sure to honor that there was an honorary guest in the Party in the Bardo who wasn't there physically, who was Lou Reed, who was in every single episode, who we talked about, who knew some of your interviewees well. And I also would love to hear you just talk about Hal and the dedication of the whole series, if you would just take a minute.
Well, Lou and Hal, his best friend Hal Wilner, had a show on Sirius Radio that was called New York Shuffle, and it was the most wide-ranging show that I've ever heard. It was for 2 or 3 years anyway. They had they did seem to have hundreds of shows. Maybe it wasn't hundreds, maybe it was 100, but a lot of shows in which they featured mostly lots of young groups, but also sort of obscure stuff. And it was just the greatest show. And they would just sit around and and banter. And speaking of that, Hal Wilner was just an incredible producer. And one of the other guests on the show, Noni, was talking about Hal as a person who had all the time in the world. Mm. And those of us who got to know Hal really knew that he just would start talking to you, and then 4 hours later you'd been in the studio listening to music and talking, and it was just the luxury of this is just an amazing thing, just to have that kind of time. And so the Party in the Bardo is dedicated to Lou and to Hal, and their friendship and their show.
Great. Well, we have some questions coming in here from Aaron Gutenplan. It's a very specific question for you, Laurie. He says, as an experimental musician and artist, have you experimented using the texture and scratchiness of 78s or cylinders as a musical element? He says, I'm reminded of when John Zorn did this on his album Zohar.
Oh, yeah. Well, I did make an instrument called the viophonograph, and it was a scratch instrument. It was just a 45 was on the violin, and then there was a needle on the bow, and so you could and then 4 sustained bands, basically, of 1 note per band, and so you could scratch around between them. I also made something for it was like a harpoon instrument, digital scratching, for an ill-fated opera that I did on Moby Dick. And by the way, if you do have a favorite author, try to avoid making an opera based on their work, because it just is not gonna, for me, what happened was I just had the white gloves on the whole time because I loved Melville so much that I didn't want to mess with it. So when you make something, you need to mess with it. So anyway, these harpoons I was really doing mostly digital stuff at that point, and I it's pretty boring to watch people with their laptops or their synthesizers just kind of trying to bob around, making it look interesting. It was like watching somebody iron, so it's not that interesting. So, the harpoon instrument was about being able to throw your body into it. So like playing the violin or saxophone, you have to use your body, not just not to say that all keyboard players don't use their bodies, plenty do, but so that was those were things that used a lot of the noise of the instrument. Also, a lot of the filters that I use for violin are about changing the perspective of the instrument, so that if you're playing the violin, your ear is right next to this, all of this rosin against, horsehair and rosin and gritting and, pulling and tugging. The violin is meant to be, a classical one is meant to be heard at a distance. So it's like, just vibrato, but far away. But I like to bring up these things that up off the noise floor that are the gritty stuff of the instrument, and before it becomes this perfect tone. So, the scratchiness of instruments is and sound in general is really, and particularly the human voice. I mean, the way we're, for example, using our voices now is like little trumpets, because we're in the little boxes, so we're trumpeting our ideas. And actually, if we did talk like we could on the radio, and it's not like that. It's just like a different way to communicate, and slower, and without pushing your ideas through space by, using almost a telephone filter to to communicate. Anyway, that answer was too long for that question. Sorry. What else do we have? Oops, Ronnie, your microphone, you have to unmute.
Thank you. I said we're getting some great questions here, so I'm excited. The next one from Zoria Arrow reminds me of how you and Jonathan in the last episode on love were talking about some of your spoken word songs that were coming out of Dream Logic. And Zoria asks, hi, Laurie, have you had any significant dreams during the pandemic?
Oh, I think I mentioned one on the love thing, which was surprising to me. I was redoing my my biography, I guess, and I had decided to add some things. I had decided to add that I had was really a proficient sailor, and that I'd won a lot of sailing competitions. And I was working on that, adding that, and thinking, wait a second, I wonder if anybody will realize that, you know, they could check on this, you know, that I have not ever, I haven't won anything, and also was written in the style of a person who obviously knew nothing about sailing at all, or terminology. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Am I trying to be really a different person? I have this feeling that I'm a slower person now, and I'm just trying to reinvent myself. It might. So anyway, I haven't figured out why I was trying to do that yet.
Let's go to a question from Jeff Fullington, who writes, do you have suggestions based on your experience of doing the Bardo show on how we can use the art of conversation to bridge our differences and current political divide?
Well, I think it's very difficult to have conversations now, just physically. I was part of a group, mostly of women, in the last 2016 election, and after the election, we wanted to get in touch with a women's group in Staten Island that had gone completely for Trump. And we thought, let's have conversations with these people and see what we can do. So we got in touch with them, and we said, we'd like to talk about it. And they were like, what's to talk about? We won, you lost. You want to talk about that? And we were like, Don, what were you saying?
Yeah, can I say something of this? There actually is a very interesting political organization called Change the Conversation Together that's been working on this exact thing for many years, like since the early aughts. And very much in this election cycle, they actually went door to door. They did a lot of COVID safety training and went door to door in Philadelphia, and I'm pretty sure other cities. It was a nonpartisan thing, just literally going door to having conversations with people, trusting that, you know, as your show indicates, just having conversations about mundane things, not trying to persuade, not trying to convince, has an impact in basically improving the civic conversation that we have as human beings.
Yeah.
So, and that was started by a guy named David Fleischer, who's, you know, there's been articles about him, but just keep that in mind. CTC, Changing the Conversation Together, is a really smart political organization. Yes.
Yeah, that is. And it is true that it's a bit of a lost art form, you know, back and forth. It's mostly about like tailoring your own information and then just regurgitating it, you know. So actually being able to be changed by someone else's thoughts and ideas is pretty huge.
Yeah. I'd love to read a related question from Anya Stein-Evan, which she writes, watching this makes me humbled that there seems to be an increased intimacy between people, even remotely. Somehow 2020 has broken down many barriers to accessing people and even changing how we speak to each other. Does the Bardo Party feel that connections have changed for them?
What do you think? Party goers? Are we?
I think it's great to, like I said, just quickly, I'll try to be quick, that listening to all the other people's choices and the way what they chose, and their interactions with you, and so on. It sort of creates this feeling for people, I think, that it makes everyone, I think, listening to it, these programs, feel that, well, what would I choose if Laurie had asked me to do this? You know, it's that whole thing about what 3 people will you have for dinner, that kind of thing. And it's sort of like allows you to conceptualize for yourself what you would want to do. And it inspires you to start thinking about things like that. So I find that an aspect, this doesn't directly answer that question, but it says it's a model for something. That's what I found.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that too, and how wonderful it would be if, you know, if rather than tackle some of these issues head on, you know, if one had I wouldn't want to say a pretext,
Yeah.
but I mean, the notion of one, you know, most people would have, you know, 6 or 8 top musical choices, and to hear most people talk about those, I think would be wonderfully revelatory, and you know, would allow actually for much greater intimacy, and one might in fact end up talking about some of the important things, but not necessarily, but do a slant in the Emily Dickinson sense, you know, at a slight angle.
Yeah. That's a really cool sort of jukebox idea. What you like to listen to, and what means something to you.
I wonder if you'll start a trend, Laurie, of people having their own parties in the Bardo.
Yeah, why not?
I want 5 of my friends to join me Saturday night for an hour, and everybody plays one piece of music, and
That'd be great. Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
Here's a great question from Rich. He writes, Laurie, you present such a positive and inquisitive attitude. I wonder if you know where that comes from. Perhaps you were influenced by someone.
Well,
that's a big question.
Yeah, I did say several times on the in this throughout these series that I'm not at all naturally a happy person. I'm a gloomy Swede. You know, I wake up every morning and I just want to kill myself. I'm telling you, it's really it's despair. It's my DNA. I never get up like that though, and it takes me a couple of hours. And by the time I have a whole series of things that I can do, and by the time I get up, I am happy.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Here's a question for Ben. Curious if you're noticing that people are turning to a radio community more than usual in the pandemic. Oops.
Good question. I think that right now radio has become, you know, it's one of those resources that people kind of, it's always in the background. They forget about it. They don't think of it as a priority. But when you want to, especially a place like WESU, which is quite a bit different from other broadcast outlets as a community station, when you're looking to get away from reality to some degree, or the projected reality that the media forces on us, WESU is really, that's one of the services we provide, is this place for people to reflect on the world around them. And definitely through, not just through this series, but I think this series certainly brought WESU and the radio we provide to a much larger audience for these episodes, especially when they made it online. But definitely in the spring, we have 2 pledge drives each year. So for example, last spring, it's really challenging. I mean, in the middle of March, we lost all of our DJs. We went immediately to a remote programming model. And through that, while we've lost some of our, we don't have everybody at the table these days, but we've gone to great lengths to make sure that each one of these little individual shows that reaches a special demographic that audience is still going to be able to tune in and listen to it. And our spring pledge drive during really tough times was one of our most successful ever. And our listeners really came through for us because of the service that we provide. And a lot of what we hear is, our mission is what we hear back from folks, which is you can't find this anywhere else. And that's what we're really happy to provide. And that's why this was such a great fit.
Oops, Ronnie, you need to do your unmute.
My bad.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Just a couple more, I think, to wrap up our questions here. There's a question about what it was like for Laurie and Jonathan to record that last episode of Love, because you recorded it before the election was called. And once it aired, well, I mean, we're still in process, aren't we? Anything to say about that?
What do you say, Jonathan?
Well, love is not going to go away because of the election. What do you think?
Well, either way it went, it would be the same situation. You'd need to figure out how to.
It makes the world go around. This
go better, yeah.
That right?
Yeah. It's.
Great. Should we move on to one more? I think this is a fun one because I think everyone could answer this. And the question is, what were some of your favorite musical discoveries in the process of doing this program? There was so much to think about.
Well, let me ask the three of you, did any of your choices surprise you and make you realize like, oh, that's the thing I'm really into? Because one of the things that really did surprise me overall was how many people included Bob Dylan. And I had in a funny way sort of forgotten about Bob Dylan, and I became a big Bob Dylan fan through doing this. I really because so many people interpret him in different ways, and like different things about him. So I was really kind of amazed at that. What about some of you? Did you?
One of the reasons why I started with Whitman, of course, was that the program was moving towards Dylan's song "I Contain Multitudes," and if one had, I myself have been a steadfast fan of Bob Dylan, really over the years, and that's a song in which he continues to show why he has been held in such regard by so many for so long. It's a fabulous song.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I definitely became a fan. And I was a little bit in the opposite camp because Lou Reed was not so enamored for some reason, just there was a little bit of like friction between the two of them. So I was always just thought maybe I should be in the other camp or something. So now I don't feel that way at all.
I listening to Power of the Heart, Lou Reed's song Power of the Heart, I had never really listened to it that carefully, closely. And listening to it now when you had it on the program really did me in. It was such an extraordinary, deep, profound, it's the power of the heart, that song. And I had not heard it, I hadn't really listened to it clearly before. I hadn't listened to it in any succinct sense of way. And I thought it was just great to listen to things like that and hearing them as if for the first time. It was really, really good.
Yeah. There have just been so many people who've written the most beautiful things, and we just have this like treasure trove of stuff. I mean, I now there's so many things in my playlists that weren't there before.
One other thing, Don played this song by Suzanne Vega, and
oh yeah, that's a beautiful one.
Was it Little Blue Stone? I don't know the title exactly.
Small Blue Thing.
Yeah.
Now that did me in too. That was just really, I hadn't heard that before, and it was really, really remarkable. I went on YouTube and started listening to it over and over again.
Wow.
Yeah. I wish I could just do this show forever. It was so much fun to do.
It's a lot of work, I know, but Laurie, I would love for you to do it endlessly into the future. Just loved every show.
Anyway, thank you, Ronnie and Ben, for putting up with me.
Oh, it was fabulous.
It's really been a great privilege to be able to do it.
By the way, this station is really great. I know about WESU. This is not a plug that I've been told to make, but what a radio program. I mean, this radio station, it really is. There's a book I read recently called Free Play, Improvisation in Life and Art. And this radio station seems to convey that, embody that idea a lot.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
one of the things I loved so much about this series was, now people are on Spotify and your next song can be determined by an algorithm, but there was a way in these segments in each of these episodes where there was the next song was determined by a friendship. The next song was determined by a life experience.
Yeah.
And an eagerness to share. And that was just such a source of joy. So I want to thank you all for being here and for celebrating Party in the Bardo with us. I know Fiona put it in the chat, but we will be re-airing the whole series starting in early February. And they will be again on WESU and again archived so that folks can listen in again in the spring. So thank you all. Thank you, Laurie, Don, Paul, Jonathan, and Ben, and Fiona out there for being with us tonight. And yes.
Party on.
We're around the bend. Party on.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.